All right, let's start finding our seats. I'm very loud. Very loud. Start finding your seat. Get ready to take notes. All right. Yes, I don't know. Yeah, I'm unmuted. All right, are we ready? Okay, a few things of just kind of business while we're getting settled down. Number one, there's still, I know it was hard to hear Ryan back over there, but there's some small white car, a Honda, that's parked back over here somewhere instead of in the parking lot. And if that's you, we need to move that. We're kind of blocking a pathway. And so I don't know whose that is. And then note that, yeah, there's bathrooms over here, but there's also bathrooms over here. So there's a couple of different sets. Over here, the women's, I think, is on the right side of that fireplace, and the men's is on the left. So you can go either direction. We also have a couple of new things set up over here. We've got a snack table, and I've lost Paul. I don't know where Paul is. He's gone. I think everything's going to be 50 cents, and so there'll be a cash box. Paul, is that right? 50 cents? Okay. So there's going to be a cash box that you can put cash in. If you don't have cash, you're welcome to Venmo Focus, and you can just get and we'll pay for whatever you do at the end of the week. So you can, if you want to Venmo and get $5 a credit or $3 a credit or whatever you can do. And that's going to be honor system because we'll ultimately pay them for whatever we use that isn't in the cash box, if that makes sense. So we'll do that, and I think later there'll be some drinks there, but in the meantime, there's also, there's fruit that you can get and don't have to pay for. There's water, and so maybe there's gonna be some lemonade or something like that. So there's a few options. Then we also set up a book table over here. So that's something I would encourage you to check out at some point during the week. And so that's kind of books that we as a staff have sort of curated that we think are really valuable. There's a few copies of each. So we'll probably explain that a couple of different times, but you can take those books with you, and then at some point you need to just pay online. And so there's a laptop over there, and you can fill out the form and pay and say which books. We got a lot of these from the publisher at a discount so that we could pass that discount on to you. So most of them should be cheaper than you could get them on Amazon or something like that. But those are all really valuable, so take time to flip through those. The one thing I ask is that you don't take the last copy until the last day. So if it's down to the last copy, you can write your name on the sticky note that's on it and kind of claim it, and you can take it. And then I think Paul will have a way for you to sign up if you want us to get you a copy of one of those. So that way everyone can look at that and we can order more or whatever. So take a moment to check that out, and we'll talk more about that later. Yes? Okay, yeah, if you're on the Wi-Fi, we need you to get off the Wi-Fi. Huh? There's a public one that they can be on. So you need to be off of CC retreats or CE retreats. So yeah, because we're going to try and stream. We're using that Wi-Fi to stream this and record and stream. Okay, anything else I need to cover before we launch in here? Yes, you can. Is that correct? That is my understanding. So, great. Okay, so last night we're going to be in that same set of notes that starts there in the 40s or whatever, the Jesus style of disciple making. We're going to continue on with that. And last night we talked about God's will for our lives, and that while we may not get to know, and that's good news because it means God has given us great freedom, who exactly we're going to marry and what exact career we're going to have and all these things, that doesn't mean that God won't step in specific ways in some of our lives and dictate some of those things. When we make Jesus Lord, he certainly has that right. But when we look at the scope of human history and even at the scripture, we find that is the exception and not the rule. Very few people in the scripture got their spouse chosen for them. Very few people in the scripture had a burning bush moment with one burning bush, and that God sort of stepped in these ways, but at any given one of those times, there were, hundreds of thousands or millions of people following God, and it doesn't mean that he didn't talk to any of the rest of them. It's never presented as normative that like, this is what the Christian life is going to be like, is every day I'm going to be like, Lord, what should I have for breakfast? And he will tell me, and if I eat the wrong cereal, I'm in disobedience. It's not, he gives us great freedom, but he gives us great freedom within a framework. And we talked about that framework being the great commandment, to love God with everything that we have. The second greatest commandment, to love our neighbor, and that includes everyone. The third commandment, the new commandment, to love the community of faith in a special way, in a higher way, because it's meant to be a witnessing community of faith who will witness about Jesus and about God to the world. And that all three, that great love life that we have results in a great purpose, a great mission, great action. And we talked about the Great Commission, that God has sent us into the world, and that the command there was not go, the command was make disciples. That as we go, wherever we find ourselves going, we are to be about the business of God, making disciples, drawing people into the most intimate allegiance imaginable. And so that's where we're going to begin today. So we're talking about the foundation of Jesus making. And the first point that I want to make is that Jesus was purposeful. Jesus was purposeful. I remember Brady, who originally prepped all of this material, talked about how for years with SICM, they were teaching this material, and he's like, these truths had been so powerful in that community up there at Western Washington. He's like, and we would share it with other people, and they come from a charismatic, focused on the Holy Spirit kind of a background. And he was like, but people would go home and nothing would change. Like nothing was happening. He said, and I finally realized that in our fixation on the Holy Spirit and on the Spirit's work, that we had a misunderstanding of the Spirit's work in our life, and we thought all of this stuff would just accidentally happen because we have the Spirit. But the Spirit does not only work in accidents and coincidences, even though sometimes that's where we might be the most likely to give him credit. The Spirit is always at work in the world to fulfill God's purposes. He's always working to fulfill God's purposes. And so if we want to be about God's business, if we want to be on co-mission with him, we have to get this right, or our impact for Jesus will be greatly reduced, if not destroyed completely. Jesus was intentional, and we have to be too. So what do I mean by purposeful? A definition. Purposeful is to act intentionally with dogged determination in a manner that is likely to accomplish the desired goal or outcome that we envision. To act intentionally with determination, doing things that are actually likely to result in our goal being accomplished. And so let's see this in Jesus. Mark 1:17, we see at the very beginning of his ministry, Jesus doing something that comes to define in large part the entirety of his ministry. And Mark summarizes it in this moment where Jesus is talking to some fishermen. And he says, "Come follow me, and I will make you into fishers of men." Come follow me, and I will make you into fishers of men. See, Jesus, in his ministry towards these people, has a clearly understood and intended outcome. He's not just hanging out with them and seeing what might happen. He's not just looking for some guys that will be fun to spend his time with until he dies. That is not what he's doing. He has a clearly understood and intended outcome for them. And that outcome was expansive compared to their sense of self and their sense of who they would be and what they would do. See, he was working to expand them as individuals so that he could ultimately expand their impact. And he wants to do the same thing for each one of us. You have some sense of self, some sense of who you are, a sense of identity, what it means to be me. And I can promise you that at whatever age you're at, whether that's 20 like most of you or nearly 70 like Ronnie, it is smaller than his vision for you. Jesus wants to expand who you are as an individual because he wants to expand your impact. These men would not be the same after time with Jesus. These men would not be the same after they spent time with him. And I think we have to realize that we are always influencing people, but are my friends the same after spending time with me? Is spending time with me, is being one of my close inner circle something that is expansive and transformative of the people around me, or am I holding that back? Or maybe I'm even influencing them in the other direction. What is your vision for the outcome of your life? What is your vision? Have you yet bought into Jesus' vision for you? Come follow him, and he will make you into something bigger. He will make your impact something bigger. Jesus is not just concerned with the American dream. He's not just interested in you making some money, having a decent career, having a good-sized family, and retiring early, sitting on the beach, whatever. Maybe all of those things are a piece of the vision, but I can tell you it's too small. It's too small. His vision is for you to have an impact, to have a legacy. And I don't mean that in the sense of history. I mean, I'm taking a history class right now, and it's a little, I don't know, it's interesting to sit and think like, okay, these guys who, are studying early church bishops and things like that, I'm like, these guys are living their entire lives for God, they're serving, they're doing this, they're leading churches in major cities, and I'm like, after you die. I think it is a good thing to think about. I've gone to a lot of funerals in my day, and there are the funerals even of people that I don't really know closely. I'll go to a friend's grandparents' funeral or something like that, and there are the ones where you sit through and you're like, man, that was a neat person. Like, I wish I had known them, because everyone that shares about them shares about the deep impact, the deep sense of love, the ways that they have tried to model their life after a life well lived. And then there's the others, and it's kind of like they had 2 kids. They worked at, HP for 40 years. And you're like, oh, this is inspiring, And it's like that's all they can think of to say is just some stuff that they did, some biographical data. What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind? Lots of people leave behind big families, but a lot of you come from big families that are broken and hurting and leave a lot of damage. And some of us come from big families where it's very much the opposite. It's a legacy of faith and healing and redemption and love. And so it's not enough to just sort of go through the motions of like, I guess I'm out of college, so I'll get married, and then we'll have some kids, and then they'll have some kids, and then we'll die. It's like it's not enough to do that. It's what kind of legacy do you want to leave behind? So here's the question. Why is being purposeful indispensable. So I want you to, just around your tables for a second, why is being purposeful indispensable? Talk about that. Okay. All right, why can we not get away from being purposeful? Just a couple real fast. Shout out best answers from your table. Be bold. Nothing. No one answered anything. We just chatted. What is it?
Can you ask the question again?
Why is being purposeful indispensable?
No, what do you want us to do?
I want you to tell me the best answer from your table. Okay.
Well, then I'll go.
Okay.
Ours was basically, that you need to be purposeful to build deep relationships with people.
Okay.
And if you're not purposeful, it's harder to get to know someone on a deep person.
Okay, yeah. If you want to go deep, purposefulness is important. Yeah, in relationships and things like that. It's a good one. What else?
If you aren't purposeful, society will just kind of take you over.
Okay, yeah, if you're not going somewhere on purpose, you will go with the flow and society will take you wherever it's going. That's a good one.
Giving God glory and leading others to Christ.
Yeah, giving God glory and leading others to Christ, stuff we're probably not going to do on accident. Let me give you a few that I think. The first one I would say is that being purposeful is indispensable. We can't get rid of it because reality demands it. This is just the world that we live in. We can live in this kind of pipe dream that, we're going to just sort of lazily serve God and accomplish his purposes because, I watched enough Netflix that then God was glorified and my neighbors came to know Christ. It's not going to happen that way. And we all know that at a deep level. Some things will happen because God is at work and we don't do very much of it, but it still takes our decision making. He invites us into that. He doesn't force us. The second is that Jesus' goals require it. Jesus' goals are bigger than the kinds of things that are going to happen naturally. And we can see that clearly. Just think about the disciple-making aspect of parenthood. The disciple-making aspect of being a parent, that it's not enough that we just sort of sit back and let the kids run crazy. It's like, no, I have to plan it. I have to purpose it. I have to think about the qualities that I want to build in. And even with all of my purposefulness, I don't get to magically make them exactly how I think they ought to be, right? They still have a will of their own. But left with no discipline and no purpose, what happens with kids? We've probably all been around some of those kids. We probably didn't want to be around them much longer. But discipline, and I don't mean punishment, I mean discipline, to really care for someone is a purposeful thing. Number two, the surrounding culture demands it. I think that's what Jacob was getting at, that the culture is going to press in on us. It's going to push us in a direction. I don't think that that's, at least at a human level, super sinister a lot of the time. I think there are evil spiritual forces behind some of that, but the reality is just most people are kind of going with the flow. They got in the lazy river, and it's taken them wherever it's taken them, and they don't even think about it. Sometimes we don't even recognize that we're moving along that thing. And so if we're going to go somewhere specific for God, it's going to mean that we have to have our eye on that and be moving in that direction. And then the last one I would just say is that maturity requires it. Maturity requires purposefulness, and we'll talk quite a bit more about that. But we live in sort of a Peter Pan culture that celebrates immaturity, that celebrates being a teenager, that celebrates youthfulness and all of the immaturity that comes with that. And we'll talk some more about that. But I think it's a major challenge for us. So if we want to be a part of Jesus' Great Commission, we have to put our will into it. We have to will for it to be a part of our lives. And that's a part of obedience. Matthew 28, again, our Great Commission, this is your next set of blanks. It asserts that Jesus purposefully intends for us to purposefully pursue his intended purposes with purposeful action. Jesus purposefully intends for us to purposefully pursue his purposes with purposeful action. Do you believe that? Do you believe that? So I want you to just take a second and think, if I believe that, what are the implications for my own mindset, for my own, is heart set a word? I don't know. You know, the stance of my own heart towards all of this. Think about that for a second. Okay, so I want us to think about living, we've talked about being betweeners. I think one of the things that we sort of live in the midst of is this tension of living in the kingdom of God while at the same time living in the culture of America. We sort of live in both. We have this dual citizenship thing going on. And if we are going to figure out how to live a Christian life throughout our lives, in each phase of our lives, it's going to be because we have come to understand how these two things engage with one another. Where does the kingdom of God and the culture of America, where do they find harmony? Because I do think there's a lot of points of harmony. You know, our nation has been deeply shaped by the Christian message. And if nothing else, every nation, every culture has been, formed by image bearers. It's just image bearers that are fallen. And so there's good in all of these things, and we have to figure out where are they in harmony, but then we also have to figure out where are they in conflict and they're seeking to conform the other to their values and expectations. Because we will get caught in the middle of that. Much of our Christian life is found in this interplay. Can I discern where kingdom values are being sort of co-opted for American values? And can I choose Jesus in those moments? And what would it even look like to choose him in those moments? So I want us to investigate two powerful words, because I think one of the deepest misunderstandings between our culture and the kingdom of God is in the interplay between these two powerful words of purposeful and spontaneous. Purposeful and spontaneous. So I think I gave you a couple of boxes in your notes. Is that correct? And so I want you to do kind of a group interaction here, again, with a couple people next to you. I want you to think, on one side, where in this, general post-Christian American culture is the purposeful life being intentional, being dutiful, obligations, those things. Where is that part of our life most celebrated, appreciated, valued, desired, expected? So purposeful is positive. And then where in this general post-American or post-Christian American culture is spontaneity most appreciated, valued, desired, or expected? So think of spheres of life, areas of life. Does that make sense? Yes. Go for it. So fill in your boxes. Did we have enough time to get stuff in both columns or need another couple minutes? There we go. 2 more minutes. Okay, let's pull back in. Jacob was showing me that in your notes, I got something got confused. Number one is Theo is not a person. I don't know who Theo is. That line is supposed to go above the other one. That's where I was asking, like, do you believe this? The thing about Jesus purposefully intends for us to purposefully pursue his intended purposes with purposeful action. Do you believe that, and what are the implications for your mindset? You can kind of switch those. Don't want to confuse you. Okay, so tell me, where in our culture is purposefulness celebrated? Work? What was it? Finances? School? What? Athletics? The military? Okay, so we have these things. Like, there are definitely places. Where is purposefulness, how did I say that? Or spontaneity most appreciated, valued, desired? Relationships, love, adventure. What was that? Entertainment. Yeah. Good thinking. You know, typically we celebrate spontaneity in sort of the arena of the heart, wherever that is, as a culture. The arena of the most valued and intimate relational connections in our adult lives, romance and friendships. We celebrate spontaneity. But there's some problems with this, and I want to unpack this. So there's cultural power around these assumptions about, romanticized love. And I'm sort of, including, again, I'll be wrapping in friendship into this as well. And we're going to spend a lot of time on friendship later in the week. So two kind of cultural assumptions or expectations about romantic relationships and about friendship love. One is that intentional, willful, disciplined action is somehow stifling to the vitality of a real and vibrant love life. That intentionality, discipline, that these things are stifling to real love. And two, that real love should not have to be planned or put on a calendar. If you have to plan it, it somehow diminishes the quality of it. We shouldn't have to be told to do romantic things. We shouldn't have to be told to pursue our friends in purposeful ways. Those are assumptions that are present in the culture of America. So I want to give us a case study. I'm going to call it A Tale of Two Boyfriends. This is a SICM classic. This goes way back. This is a legend. So here's the question for the ladies. I'm going to give you two scenarios and ask you which one would you pick? Which kind of boyfriend would you prefer or desire? Okay, so boyfriend number one. He is thinking about you on his way home from a day at class where he's been reading the great poets of the Western world for humanities class. He's been meditating on what a wonderful lady you are and how fortunate he is to have you in his life. And then suddenly, caught up in these musings, he's inspired and he pulls off the road and heads for the little shop that you love called Flowers, Chocolates, and Such. To buy you flowers and your favorite candy. He arrives at your place and you wonder what the occasion is, and he just declares that you are the occasion. And how grateful he is to have such a wonderful woman as you are in his life. Boyfriend number two is also on his way to meet his great girlfriend. He's a computer science major, smart as a whip. He really gets how math, works and all these different things. He's very, able to figure things out. His head is full of science and theorems. He's also a little forgetful. So as not to be a disappointment to the girl that he values, he puts in his phone calendar for every third Thursday to get flowers and Blizzard for Bay. And sets a reminder alarm. And like clockwork, he has brought her flowers and a small blizzard every third Thursday of the month. Okay, which one would you prefer? Okay, so I like how the guys are like, number two, I want to be number two. So most ladies, I've sat through this, I've heard this asked to, well over 1,000 young ladies at this point. And most ladies want this spontaneous boyfriend number one. And their reasoning is often something like, well, if you have boyfriend number two, you get to where you know it's coming, and you either expect it or you start taking it for granted, or someone like that has done that. Rare. And people have grown in their faith in spite of it, but not because of it. And so it's a gift to those of you who intentionally carve out sacred space in your life for the sake of Jesus' mission and in a spirit of love for others. Those are things that will grow people over time, because it's kind of like plowing up a garden and making sure the soil has the right nutrients and is watered, and you create a space where something beautiful can grow. And certainly things can grow in other inhospitable places. but they grow much more quickly and much more vibrantly when the ground is prepared. So question number one, questions to be pondered and answered. I want to kind of reflect on some of these. Question number one is, does love obligate us? This is a word we hate, right? Obligation. But does love obligate us? So here is my question. Does real love obligate us? Does love implicitly entail duty? And what are some examples of love's duties, if so? So talk about that around your table. Does love obligate us? Does love mean duty? And what would be some of love's duties? Okay. I'd like to hear, again, I'd like to hear just what's some of what's coming up at your table. Tell me, be bold and share some things. Yeah.
So one answer at our table says that if the obligation becomes for love, before the love is not like true love, but if the love entails obligation, that is.
Okay. So yeah, that we could get the cart before the horse kind of thing. If obligation is the primary thing and not love, then that's not love. But that love does entail obligation. Okay, great. What else?
I think it's the sense of like Jesus' love being poured into us, and the least that we can do is just give that same love to others.
Mm-hmm.
People can just like honor God and think, okay, we're not worthy of it, but yet He still gives it to us. So the least that we can do is just share that love.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds me of Paul saying, she's talking about Jesus' love for us sort of entails an obligation of love towards others. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5, he says, "For Christ's love compels us because we're convinced that one died for all and that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for the one who died for them." So yeah, there's this, his love compels us into a love relationship with others. Who else? Sorry.
Yeah, it like
Go for it, Becca.
it's a lot more if like my friend like comes and has like a conversation with me or like intentionally hangs out with me versus just like, oh, it's convenient to hang out with you. So I think yes, love does obligate us.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think sometimes we think when we celebrate spontaneity in relationships, we're usually thinking pretty short term. over the long haul, I deeply appreciate the things that, the consistency of people in my life. Because if you kind of think about those friends that really are driven by spontaneity and they sort of pop in and out of your life, it's over time, it's kind of like, I don't know that I can really rely on that person. I actually am starting to have kind of mixed feelings about that friendship, but that's driven by they're excited to be with me today, and that can be a kind of intoxicating thing. But yeah, the long haul is different. Clarissa, what were you going to share?
I was gonna say, so Abigail talked about like the parallel in James talking about faith without works, and like what is the evidence of love, and does it show through your actions?
Yeah.
And so if you just say you love someone, but it doesn't show work, then it should be.
Yeah. So she said, kind of like James talks about faith without works is dead, that these actions or these obligations of love sort of prove that the love is there. Is that a good way of saying that? Okay, what are some of love's obligations or some of love's duties? Did y'all get to that question? Jacob? Sorry, I'm struggling to hear. To elevate, is that what you said? Yeah. And nurture, elevate and nurture. I'm sorry, big room. Yeah, to elevate and nurture other people, absolutely. What else?
Sacrifice time for the other person, and then you can also think of like the fruit of the spirit, like love, patience, love time, self-control, discipline.
Yeah. So that there's an obligation of time, and there's an obligation of the way, what the definition of love is, that we live out the fruit of the Spirit, the definition of love. Yeah. Yeah, so maybe one of love's obligations is forgiveness, and if we're going to continue in relationship.
I mean, if you have like a newborn baby, you're going to get up in the middle of the night and feed it.
Yeah, and I think it is easy. Yeah, as we think through these different kinds of relationships, what are love's obligations to someone I'm dating versus what are love's obligations to someone that I'm married to? Well, those are different. Sometimes I think we get confused about that and the advice that we give one another and stuff like that. But versus to a child versus to a parent, different relationships we could unpack. Anyone else love's obligations? Yeah.
Like consistency regardless of emotional state.
Okay, so there's an obligation of consistency. Yeah.
It also could be like work for like time, because like don't do that or don't do like gifts or like work and all that, but it's like always a lot of love there, and it's just the point you're not trying to spend like time specifically without.
Okay, I'm so sorry.
Just like birthday celebration.
Okay. Yeah, so we have different kinds of expectations in those kinds of things. So love has duties. The problem we have is that the culture often finds the idea of love obligating us a rather obscene idea if it's in the romantic area of life or even in the friendship kind of area of life. We find that sort of obscene and problematic. And I think we have to recognize that sort of gut level reaction in ourselves and then question it. Question if is that something that is really of Christ? I see the church being influenced by the culture in this area. We hear it in our songs. We hear it in our prayers when we say things like, Lord, talking to Jesus, like, you didn't come out of duty, but out of love, as if him coming out of duty is somehow inconsistent with the idea that he loves us, right? Or that we would see a problem with going to church on Sunday morning out of duty rather than out of love, as if those two things are somehow inconsistent, because we've defined love around the fickleness of our feelings. Do any of you want to get married at some point? See, there's a reason that marriage, the thing that separates dating from marriage is not a wedding with all of your family and friends. You can make that transition without that. The thing that separates it are the promises that we make, the vows. And the problem with vows is they obligate me to do things, right? That what I promise, when I married Sarah, and we used somewhat traditional vows. That's what we do in our community. In the pre-engagement material, they reflect on the traditional vows. But basically what we say is that I will not let circumstances determine my faithfulness to this promise. I will not let circumstances determine my faithfulness to you. The changing circumstances of life or my changing emotional state will not alter my promises to love you and care for you. But we take so many promises lightly. We either fear to make promises, which is often our problem in our culture, or when we make them, we don't keep them. But God is both a promise maker and a promise keeper. I love, there's an article in your binder called The Power of Promising by Lewis Smedes. And it's one, if you haven't read it in core or anything, I definitely encourage you to read and reflect on that. Because what Smedes talks about is that he thinks the two most God-like capabilities that humans have, the things that really make us in his image, the things that animals cannot do, only humans and God can do, is make promises and forgive. That these are the things, and he talks about how anxiety rules our lives, and he's like, most of our anxiety is not about the present moment. Our anxieties are about what's happened in the past or about what's going to happen in the future. We feel out of control. We're out of control of our past because it's already happened, and we're out of control of the future because we don't know what's going to happen. And he says that while forgiving is the power to change the past, promise making is the power to change the future. That we can look forward into an uncertain future, into the chaos of the future, and create an island of certainty. I don't know what all is going to happen, but I know what I'm going to be doing. And you can count on me. And that when we do that, we are more like God than at any other time. So where can we practice our ability to be like God? How do you develop your ability to keep marriage vows, to be a faithful parent? Where do we practice those things when they're not celebrated in our culture? I want you to think about that. Where are you as a young person to practice and develop your ability to make and keep promises? Talk about that around your table. Yes. Where are you as a young adult able to practice making and keeping promises so that you will be skilled at it when it comes time to be a spouse or a parent? Let's do this. Finish your conversation, and then let's take about a 5-minute break, and then I'll call us back. So whatever you want to share, and then take a break. In class? Work? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, these are the spheres of our lives where we can begin to see what we're made of. Are you a friend who's able to make and keep promises? That gives you a good clue as to where your character is in this. If you're not able to make and keep promises, if you're not someone that your friends rely on, it tells you that you've got some serious work to do before marriage or parenting. Core is one of those places. I think about, just our unwillingness often to just make a commitment. We're so afraid of commitments sometimes, and so I want to make this lifelong commitment through thick and thin, but I am unwilling to commit for, 30 weeks to be there an hour and a half a week. What if I had homework? What if I had something else I'd rather do? It's like, but this is where we practice. If you can any commitment and keep it, I promise you're not ready to make a big one and keep it. Work is one of those things. Even our Corfa commitments. I know a lot of people look at that and think, oh my gosh. I mean, I have other campus ministers. They're like, how do you get anyone to make that commitment? And I'm kind of like, how do you not? How do you have leaders that aren't willing to commit to anything? They don't even promise to show up. They don't even promise to be consistent or to look out for people. And then when I ask questions, I'm like, yes, one of the challenges they have in their community is their leaders don't show up for the groups that they're supposed to lead. They're busy that day. They have homework. I'm like, yeah, we all have homework. I plan around it. Just like we plan around the things that are really important to us. So, yeah, the corporate commitments is an opportunity to practice that for some of our community in a bigger sense, but still very limited. That for 9 months, here is what I'm going to be doing with some of my life. I'm going to be looking out purposefully for these other people. I think it's a great practice in the direction of parenting. I'm going to forego some of the rights that I have, whether it's the right to, what I want to do on Wednesday night or a Monday night during a leader meeting, or whether it's the right to drink with my friends, or whether, these are rights that we have. In Christ, they're good things, but we've looked as a community and thought, what is it going to take to hold this community together and move it in a good direction? And so we make commitments to one another. In Jesus, we see some answers to this questions. I think about John 14:15. Jesus says, if you love me, keep my commands. And so here's an obligation of love for Jesus is obedience. Because he's not just our buddy, right? It's not just Jesus, my friend, it's Jesus, my Lord. And so love for a Lord is expressed in obedience. In 14:21, whoever has my commands and keeps them is the one who loves me. In 15:13, he goes even further and he says, greater love has no one than this, that he intentionally lay down his life for another. That we lay down our lives for others. That is how love is really defined in Jesus' mind. So we have to go on to a further question and kind of wrestle with what is the relationship between emotions and authentic actions. Between emotions and authentic actions. Because authenticity is something that we're very concerned with. And rightfully so. Hypocrisy was something that Jesus was very concerned with. But what did he mean by that? So I have this little case study I called The Strange Case of the Uncalled and Unjoyful Small Group Member. And this kind of scenario has played out a lot of times in our community. So a student says to their small group leader in response to a talk about serving and giving, I just don't feel like it's the Lord's will that I mentor others or give financially. I have wrong motives about leading a core or mentoring, and I know that Jesus said we should give joyfully, but I'm not joyful, so I would just be faking it. I need to be authentic and true to myself. Okay, so around your tables, what would you say in response? All right. Okay, let's pull back in. So I'll tell you kind of, I've had this kind of conversation with many people over time of various ages, because this question of authenticity and what does it mean to really be authentic is one that is very real to us. Here are the kinds of questions that I ask in response. Okay, you need to be authentic and true to yourself. But who is the authentic you that you're being true to? Which self are you being true to? The old, being true to the emotionally perceived self, or the theologically revealed self? Are you being true to the immature child in Christ that you started out as? Or are you being true to the mature man or woman of God that you're becoming? Because we're being shaped and changed, and that is the thing that this authenticity often leaves out. It leaves no room for maturing. In fact, it leaves us in immaturity. Something will shape you. Something will shape your life. But will it be the word of your emotions or the word of the Lord? So we have a myth for being authentic to ourselves, misguided when it's wrapped up in our emotions, versus learning to be and live in ways that are congruent with our beliefs, with what we believe to be true, with what the Lord has told us. So my observation is that for many, there's a very real internal competition between a principled or purposed, directed life, and one that's directed or dependent on the inspiration of our emotions. And we know the connection between emotions and spontaneity. And this is not to say that I'm bad. It's just they are what they are. They are what they are. But they will not, in and of themselves, produce maturity. They won't grow us up. So do you and I intend to be a part of Jesus' great co-mission in the world? The mission we're on with him. Do we intend to make disciples? And if yes, then what will that lead us to purposefully learn? And before we move on, I want you to just we've covered a lot of ground so far. So around your table, really probably just with maybe one partner for time, I want you to just share what's sort of stirring in your heart from all of this. What's standing out to you, encouraging you, challenging you thus far? I'm just going to give you a couple minutes, so each one of you share. Okay, make sure your second person is sharing now, if not yet. Okay, let's pull back in here. Okay, so we've been reflecting on principle number one of Jesus' style is that he was purposeful. He did it on purpose. It wasn't just spontaneous. He didn't wait around for it to happen. Number two, Jesus' style of disciples making. Second value here is that Jesus intentionally entered into real kingdom relationships. He intentionally entered into real kingdom relationships. So we see that in action in Mark 3. It just says, this is where Jesus is calling the apostles. He's choosing them from among the people who are already following them. And it just says he called those that he wanted so that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach. So in action, we see Jesus intentionally, because again, we've been talking about intentionality is the way of genuine love, creates an intimate relational reality, not an impersonal and now technologically dominated method of learning and growing. His method of teaching, of transforming these men, is that they would be with him, a relational reality. He does not choose an impersonal or technologically dominated method of learning and growing. And again, when I say technology, he had his own technologies available. They could write and read, and that is not the method that he chose to use, even though those technologies were available to them. So why do we do small groups in Focus? Well, we do it because Jesus led a disciple-making small group. Jesus led a disciple-making small group. Why do you think Jesus grew disciples intentionally by forming a small group? Why a small group? I think it's because he's intentionally creating a learning context that is most conducive to forming in his followers something, not just information, but formation of the individual, forming in them the full realities of what it means to be his followers, what it means to live out the kingdom life, what it means to live out God's will, those 4 commands that we talked, framing our lives. So the ideal small group, the one that Jesus led, sorry, I'm coughing. The one that Jesus was leading was about formation, not information. So I want you to think briefly at your table. Again, we won't do this many table discussions all through it, but I think these are helpful about your past small group experiences. And to what extent, what's the best, what's the worst, to what extent do they measure up to this this formation of real kingdom life in people versus just sort of information or activity. Okay? Share about All right. Yeah, so, we've had different experiences. In my experience and in my observations, most small groups fail at this. Most of what I see in the church today, most Bible studies don't do this. They're good at sort of passing along information, but they're poor at Christian formation. And we're going to spend a lot of time, Mandy will be unpacking for you, more of a small group philosophy. What are we really trying to get done beyond just a Bible study or beyond just a hangout and share or beyond, because we tend to kind of zero in on one aspect of a healthy small community and just kind of double down on it and ignore the rest of it. And it really is in balance and in reflecting on all of the things that Jesus was doing in this group that you find a group that's powerful in our lives, not just for the members, but for the leaders as well. And Jesus doesn't just do one-on-one ministry. We are very big in focus. We say one-on-one is how it's done. Like one-on-one is a huge strength. It's a huge stress. But it is not all we're trying to do. Our goal is not to just create a bunch of one-on-ones happening out there in a vacuum. Because one-on-ones are great for knowledge, and they can even be great for certain kinds of character development. But we need to grow in kingdom relatedness. We need to grow in our ability to relate to the people around us in the ways that God designed us to. And when you just do that with one person, you don't learn a lot of it. You need that annoying person in your small group much of this time. But he talked about when he was a little boy, he learned the faith from his father and mother at home. That was the context in which learning the Christian faith happened. So he learned about the reality of Jesus by being in close, trusting relationships with people who were living for Jesus. People who loved one another and stayed married to each other. But then there have been these massive changes that have taken place in our culture since World War I and World War II. And so we've seen a shift in focus in our culture from ideas like we need to do whatever it takes to save the world to we need to do whatever it takes to find personal fulfillment. Those are the things that are really concerning. Even in things like volunteerism and stuff, there have been major shifts of the reasons that people report volunteering and serving from like, I saw they needed something, they didn't have as much as me, to I want to make a difference. It's like that song, I am a difference maker. But even the focus of why we serve others has become somehow on ourselves and about me. We've seen economic upward mobility. We've seen, changes demographically in terms of, women moving into the university, women moving into the marketplace. And I don't think those things are negative, but there's a challenge here because we have this fixation on, equal pay and equal position, and I'm all for equality. The problem that I think we often miss in that is that it gives us a clue that we are using pay and position as chief determiners of our value and self-esteem. And it leaves the women or men who stay at home to serve and nurture their children in a place that's really funky. And I've seen that even with my non-Christian friends who don't have this sense. It's like they'll get their degrees, they're very highly educated, and then they have this deep sense of like, I want to stay home and be with my kids, and they feel like a failure. And there's no way in the culture to celebrate that because money and power is everything. Money and power tells us who we are and what we're worth. And the homemaker, while doing the highest work in some senses, doesn't have those things. So we have to watch these things, that our culture is changing the way we're measuring and the way we're thinking. At the same time, the family has been challenged by so many competing values and priorities, so that, in addition to the breakdown of families and the different kinds of families that, the single parent families, so many divorces, even just the families that have stayed as sort of nuclear families rarely have family meals or family evenings together. Those are just kind of things of the past. I know growing up, we ate dinner together pretty much every night of the week at the table. That is becoming a rarer and rarer thing. I think students today, as I talk to students, they are so deeply impacted by all of these non-relational forces going on in our culture. These growing anxieties, the sense of like alienation, anger about societal wrongs, all of the activities that we're kind of called into and have to do to sort of measure up. There's pressure from middle school onward to sort of overcome the competition in every single area of life. And all of those shaping factors are non-relational. They're not really about key relationships or people in our lives who are shaping us in purposeful ways. And where do we end up? Well, we end up with the church, by some studies, and this is kind of a summary estimation, but the church is getting about a 70% non-retention rate of their high school graduates. Now, some of them come back eventually, but going off to college, going off into the university setting or the early adult life setting, 7 out of 10 are not embracing the Christian faith. And so it's a major failure, and we see that while we as a church are are trying to educate our kids, we're trying to pass on the faith, we're failing miserably. And I think it's because we've chosen the wrong one of two images. So I want to give us two images about learning: the lap and the lecture. The lap and the lecture. And this, again, coming from Dr. Houston's reflections, one image is a child on their parent's lap versus the image of a student sitting in a lecture hall with hundreds of other students, preparing for the test that's coming tomorrow. And all too often, the church has sort of resorted to the lecture style. And that's what we do. It's the sermon has become the center point of the Christian experience, if not the singing more and more. But it's certainly not the center point of the Christian experience. We don't tend to think of a pastor who knows my name, is investing in me, talking with me. The families have given Christian education over to the Sunday schools rather than doing it at home. They're too busy or whatever else, or feel too unequipped. But yeah, where this leads is that the church is dominated or maybe even enamored by a mere informational concept of disciple making. It's just all about passing on the information, getting the right doctrines, the right ideas. We obsess with Bible trivia. And we think that somehow knowing a lot means we're mature. That maturity is informational. I remember studying with a kid in my, one of the very earliest guys I ever studied the Bible with, one-on-one, and he was like a Bible quiz champion. I mean, the minutia he knew about the book of Matthew, because that was the book they were doing that year, was just astounding. And I'm like, the most useless information. But I remember telling him, like, as we were studying, any question you have, like, feel free to ask. Like, there's no question too dumb. And we were talking about something, and he's like, what is a parable? I'm like, he could tell me the details of every single parable in Matthew, but he didn't even understand what it was, much less living for God. And so we have this informational concept of disciple making as opposed to a relationally transformational concept of disciple making that leads into this great commission. Where does this lead us? It leaves us with so many people. One of the most common things I hear from people who don't want to lead or who don't see themselves as a leader or as capable of leading another person is what? I don't know enough. I don't feel like I know enough. And that tells us that we think that somehow knowledge is the thing that gets us to that level. But I want you to look at Jesus' disciples and how quickly he sends them out to preach. They are decades away from understanding the gospel. One of the most amazing things to me, one of the shocking moments in the history of my own personal Bible study was when I was studying a commentary on the book of Acts. And so you get to Acts 10, which is where the first Gentile becomes a Christian. The first non-Jew becomes a Christian. And then the church, debates it and all, can we even do this and all this stuff. And the commentator was just basically talking about these different markers in time and stuff. And he's like, most scholars think this was about a decade after Jesus' resurrection and ascension. And I was like, wait, what? It took the apostles who spent 3 years personally with Jesus, a decade to figure out that Gentiles could even be in the church. And we're kicking people out because they disagree with us on predestination or whatever little thing that is unclear. I'm like, that's a major thing. Were they all heretics for those 10 years? I don't know, but it's like Jesus was able to use them when they really understood so little. His impact with them was going to develop as they lived life with him, right? Go and be about my business, and I promise to be with you. I will be with you if you will be doing these things. See, the sad thing is It's very rare that someone tells me that they can't lead because they see significant character flaws in themselves. It's typically about information. We see this in the church at large right now, that we are prioritizing Bible knowledge and doctrinal stances over Christ-like character and purposeful love in choosing our leaders. You know, some of you may have been listening to the podcast that's coming out right now about the rise and fall of Mars Hill. If you haven't, it's a pretty interesting one. But that's one of the things that they're doing is, what is it in our about American Christianity that we keep picking celebrity pastors whose speaking ability has outpaced their character? Because we could blame them, but really we need to blame us. We're the ones who lift them up. We're the ones who make the most inappropriate things that they say into viral videos. It's why we see students who will leave a ministry where a student leader is purposefully investing in them to go sit in a chair and listen to a great speaker who does not and never will know their name. I'm like, you can watch that on YouTube, bud. You don't have to go. But you can't get this on YouTube. See, there's powerful change can be brought into a student's life when another student intentionally carves out time to offer free listening, consistent time, and a genuine desire to bring the power of Jesus into that student's life. Powerful change results from that. And I would tell you, as you go out, and some of you are already moving beyond the student life, that same power can penetrate the oppressive and dysfunctional centers of the post-college marketplace. It's the power of a spirit-filled man or woman who wants to be a minister, who creates relational space for those around them. This bringing those people into their hearts and lives. So what are the attributes of this kind of relational mentoring that we're talking about? And the first one is just that Jesus' style of relational mentoring is rooted in a heart of spirit-empowered hospitality. Spirit-empowered hospitality. And I'm using this word in a broader sense. I don't just mean hosting people in your home and making dinner. I mean hosting people in your heart and making room. The open, welcoming heart of God is seen in Jesus, right? He is the doorway to the kingdom of God, and that door is wide open to all kinds of folks, right? The question I could ask myself is, am I a doorway to God's heart, or am I a wall? Jesus' mission begins with this invitational call to come and be with me. And he's giving it indiscriminately. And you see that from the Gospels. We see it's not just the apostles who get the invitation to come and be with me. And we see glimpses throughout. It was poor people and rich people and men and women and, Nicodemus on one hand and prostitutes on the other hand. And, it was this broad invitation. We talked about the breadth of the mission yesterday. His open, welcoming, hospitable heart. And hospitality is this kind of old-fashioned word. Today we might use the word welcoming, but the problem is the word welcoming, it doesn't capture this like surprising, radical nature of God's hospitality, right? I'm on the welcoming committee at church. Hello, welcome. That can be good. I think we should do that, I remember going to, Focus on Friday nights at UTD, and we'll have people at the door, and they're, giving high fives and welcome, we're glad you're here. Like, that is a piece of it. We want to communicate that. It's important, but it's only a little piece of it. Maybe we could call it radical, audacious, extravagant welcoming and get closer to it. But it goes beyond greeting people to truly inviting them into our lives and hearts. Jesus said the Son of Man came to seek and rescue those who are lost, right? The Son of Man came to seek. He's intentionally initiating with people and to rescue the lost, which means he's throwing the net open wide. He didn't just come for one little group of people. A lot of people are lost. And Jesus' open, welcoming hospitality will get him in lots of trouble because he reaches out to people from all the various stratifications of the world. He's got rich women and prostitutes traveling together, and with him. He's got men dedicated to the violent overthrow of Rome, zealots, rubbing shoulders with men who are employed by Rome, the tax collectors. The tax collectors are going to have to share close quarters with the fishermen that they've been overtaxing. Jesus is going to empower the powerful to become the servants of all. And he's going to lift up the oppressed and marginalized and make them leaders in his movement. He's including everyone. He cuts through to the heart by telling these people that loving those that you naturally click with is not what the radical, welcoming nature of God's kingdom is like. He says, even the pagans do that. So what virtue is there in it? Everyone does that. Be like God. So what does it look like if we want to earn a doctorate in spirit-empowered hospitality? That would be something to aspire to. In spending time with Jesus, this isn't something you learn in a classroom. It's something you learn on the ground in relationships. It's in Jesus' small group that his first followers experienced this radical relational hospitality from him. In the ancient world, to be a disciple of a rabbi, you had to sort of earn that place, and you had to go apply, and they would accept a few. And the very fact that these guys are fishermen and tax collectors and not on the rabbi track means they've already failed out. They are not in the system anymore. They have finished school and gone in, they did Votech, right? And they're off doing their blue-collar jobs. And it's those guys that this rabbi comes and invites to be his followers. He chooses them. He says that later. You didn't choose me, I chose you. And we can do that for people. But it's in being pulled into that small group that they are being shaped into being men and women of large and welcoming hearts. And we see that as the story plays out, that it was those men and women who had experienced that who went out and did that for other people. I've been studying, again, early church history, and one of the things that we have certain letters of these different Roman emperors and stuff sending back and forth is it really bothers them that the Christians are taking care of all the poor people. Not just the Christian poor people, of all the poor people. And it's making them look bad, because they don't care about any of them. And so there's different moments in this whole story where the Roman emperors were like, well, we better do something, because they're just trying to compete to keep up with, and so that they can look good and be famous in this. But the Christians, they open their nets wide. We don't care who it is. We'll help. We'll serve. And it began to transform society. You can't learn this kind of stuff merely through a lecture, no matter how good the lecture is. You learn to be spiritually welcoming by intentionally placing yourself in relational places. Or even better, by intentionally creating relational environments. Because what you need to do is train your heart and your mind to grow into the heart and mind that we see in Jesus, the Good Shepherd. And one note that I would say here is that so often we excuse ourselves from this on the basis of personality. Well, I'm introverted. Well, I'm this. And number one, there's a deep difference between being introverted and being shy. Introverted is about, where do I recharge? Do I recharge alone or with people? Shyness is about giving into fear. And I say that as a person who can be very shy. Shyness is about letting fear rule my life and relationships. And it is not a legitimate reason for a Jesus follower. But we take these personality tests. We get this stuff, and it tells me all this stuff. One of the things that Brady says that I think is helpful is he's like, personality tests don't tell you anything. You tell the test something, and it just repeats it back to you. So however off your self-perception is how off the test will be. But these tests, I use them. I like them. I think they are helpful. I think they're great conversation starters. I think they're a great place for us to start understanding where we're at and what growth might look like. But all a test can give me insight in is to who I am right now. It can't give me insight into who I'm becoming in Christ. So I can look at a test and I can see these qualities in myself, but I then have to ask, now, is that how Jesus wants me to be? And I also have to realize that, Jesus can gift me differently at different times. There may be different needs. There may be different opportunities. There's nothing in the Bible that says the Spirit's gifts, like he gives you one, and then that's your gift for the rest of your life. Very much the opposite. What Paul tells the Corinthian church is to eagerly desire greater gifts. But the interesting thing is, he's not saying greater gifts in the sense of like, oh, you have the gift of hospitality. That's kind of like not one of the greater gifts. Like, what you really need is the gift of tongues. That's a greater gift. No, the argument he's making in that 1 Corinthians 12 to 14, if you go and read what he's talking about, because remember 13, our favorite wedding passage that's not about weddings, but about spiritual gifts. Love is patient, kind, all this. All that stuff about love is in the context of how do we use our gifts in the assembly. And for Paul, the greatest gift is whatever one is needed at the moment. It's just, and you think about that. It's kind of like if we were all gathering around to give someone gifts and they're like, yeah, well, but my car just crapped out. And you're like, well, I'm going to give you a new car. It's like, that's the greatest gift. It's what they really needed. They would be most excited about that at that moment. And that's the kind of thing we get to do. And then sometimes the gifts that I'm given, no one needs it right now. It's not a very great gift. And so I sit quietly back and support and encourage the people who have brought what the community really needs, while trying to develop and have what can serve others. So don't reduce people to a single thing. Don't reduce people to an Enneagram number or, an IMBJ or what, I don't know what all these different, numbers are and things that have. Don't reduce them to that. We want to expand people to be like Jesus, right? There's this reductionism that happens so often in the personality testing world, but Jesus is expanding us. He wants us to be more than we are right now. The next thing is that Jesus-style mentors facilitate liberty. They facilitate liberty. We desire to see people freed from Satan, freed from sin, even freed from ourselves. We're sowing, in the sense of seeds, sowing in them God's wisdom and word that will free them from foolish thinking. The foolish thinking of fallen humanity that passes itself off as wisdom. We can promote freedom from false dependency on the wrong kinds of things, from self-centeredness. We can be liberated from being merely takers and be equipped to be effective givers, that we enlarge our life, we enlarge our impact, that we grow into something more than we once were. We can be set free from immaturity and liberated to be who we were designed to be. The next one, Jesus-style mentors provide mutual encouragement. Mutual encouragement. And mutual is important here because this is not about inviting people into some sort of relationship where it's just a one-way street. It's about inviting people into brotherhood and sisterhood, that they grow up and begin to give back. Ecclesiastes says 2 are better than 1. The return on their work is greater. If one falls, the other is there to pick him up. But pity the man who has no one to pick him up. When 2 lie down together, they'll keep each other warm. But how can one keep warm alone? A 3-corded strand is not quickly broken. See, if Jesus, who is the most capable person who ever lived, right? Do we agree? Most capable person who ever lived, invited people into his life and ministry, then that means your ministry can't just be a Lone Ranger thing or a one-way street. You need to invite people in as much as they need you to invite them in. It doesn't mean that you always play the exact same roles in each other's life, though. It doesn't mean that relationships are exactly equal, as if what would that even look like? In real relationships, there's this constant ebb and flow of who has more and who can give more and who needs more. That's what real love relationships look like. So the message here is that, your brain with my brain is always better than just my brain. Your heart with my heart is going to do more than just my heart. Your creativity with mine, your strength with my strength, your intuition with my intuition. Together we can bring something better than we can bring on our own. Do you believe that? And then what would that mean for us? The next thing is that Jesus-style mentors offer protective accountability. Protective accountability. So I'll define those 2 words. Protective, I mean, having or showing a strong wish to keep someone or something safe from harm. And accountability is the fact or condition of being accountable or responsibility. So, again, Jesus sends out his disciples in Luke 10, and they come back reporting what has gone on, telling him about all this stuff, but he protects their hearts in that moment by kind of pushing back. And that could be sort of seen as raining on their parade, right? He says, don't rejoice that the spirits submit to you. Rejoice that your names are written in heaven. But he's protecting them. He's protecting their hearts. You're getting excited about the wrong stuff in all of this. You don't want to go down that road. He's looking out for them. I want to use the case study. I don't know why I called this person Willie. I think maybe Brady called this person Willie. A hypothetical but very real person. A committed, sincere, energetic core leader who asked his campus pastor if they would keep him accountable in his attraction and dating of this girl in the fellowship. He says, I want to do it right. I want to go slow. And so his campus pastor asks him, well, when are you planning on asking her out? He's like, oh, yeah, I think I'm going to try and go out Saturday night. He says, oh, sorry, I'm busy that night. See, Willie was not looking for true accountability. What he was asking for was, post-event inquiry and damage control, right? That's so often when we talk about the term accountability, it's like, After I mess up, I will tell you about it, and then we'll try to fix that. But that's not really the kind of protective accountability that we're talking about. What we want to ask one another is, what do you believe Jesus' will or desired outcome is in this situation? Right? So in a dating thing, we say things like, oh, I want to go slow. But why slow? What does slow look like? We need to understand what is the right or the good that Jesus wants behind all of that. Purity, protection of the other, putting her well-being ahead of my own. And then the question becomes, well, how much do you really desire that kind of relational purity? How much do you value it? What's it worth to you? To what length will you go to protect your own integrity and to protect someone else's integrity? And often the sad answer is we won't go very far. We want to walk the edge of the cliff. We want to know what's okay, not what's wise. I think a helpful question that has been in my mind these last few weeks, I heard it from one of my mentors, is he just said, first asking, what do you think the wise choice would be? And then saying, what story do you want to be able to tell later? When you look back on this time in your life and you're telling the story about this dating relationship, or what story do you want to be able to tell? And think about that. To what length will you go to protect your own integrity and the integrity of others? See, if you desire what's right, then you'll create your own chaperone. You'll have to figure out what that looks like. I remember talking to a couple that had been pretty impure, and I was asking them questions about where and when. It was always in each other's apartments, and sometimes even when roommates were also in the apartments. And I was like, okay. I was like, well, I think there's a real simple solution. And they're like, what's that? And I was like, never be in each other's apartments together. And they're like, oh, well, that would be really hard. And I'm like, okay, well, do you want to be in each other's apartments or do you want to be pure? You can't do both. You've already proven you can't do both. And I was like, I've been at UTD a long time, and I have yet to see anyone have sex in the Comic Cafe. But I mean, I left them with that question, and I came back. I was like, maybe other couples can do that, but you can't do that. You've already been down a different road, and it's too dangerous. And, I got with them 2 or 3 months later and was kind of asking, and they're like, yep, no problems. Coffee shops and Comic Cafe isn't very sexy. But their relational intimacy had grown. And they were able, in that couple's case, to figure out over time that this sexual relationship that had been bonding them had been masking the lack of real relational intimacy and the real lack of compatibility between them. At another couple, it was always in a pickup truck. Front row of, bench seat pickup truck. And it was, and chivalry. Oh, I have to drive her everywhere, chivalry. I'm like, well, do you want chivalry or do you want purity? You're going to have to decide. And so they decided to start meeting places instead in order to protect one another. So we need to be asking what's wise. That's the question we need to be asking each other. If someone was like, walking alongside a cliff, what's wise? Well, it's not like balancing on the edge, it's like it's step a few feet back, get where you can see the view, but you don't have to walk right on the edge. So some accountability takeaways. These are just general reflections, but accountability is welcomed and sought by the wise. It's not forced or dictated. Proverbs says the wise son seeks out wise counsel. The second one, the goal of mentoring and accountability is the nurturing of personal, internal integrity, not dependence on another person. We're not trying to nurture dependence on ourselves. We're trying to nurture personal integrity and teach people how to seek that out, live that out. Accountability has to do with watching, seeing, hearing, and then speaking. And I think when we're providing that for other people, it means that our eyes and our attention is on them so that we can speak words that will bring life to them. I think about the watchman role that Ezekiel is called to in Ezekiel 3. And there's other places like that. Jesus' instructions of how we hold someone in the church family accountable when they're caught in sin, that we go to them and we take someone else to them and we ultimately bring them to a broader community. Paul's instructions in Galatians that when someone's caught in sin, you who are spiritual ought to restore them gently, but also carefully so that you don't become embroiled in those things. So we have to be willing to see, and then we have to be willing to speak, to look out for each other. And there's risk in that, right? Especially if the person you're trying to offer protective accountability to is not a wise person, but instead what the Bible calls a fool. And that's some of us sometimes, right? We become a fool. We don't want that kind of wisdom in our lives. But that's something to be repentant of, not something to be proud of. I would say another insight on accountability is if I am someone who, I'll sin when I'm alone, I'll sin in secret, but not in public, it shows that I fear men more than God. And the one who fears people can't fully fear God. But fear of God sets us free from fearing people. Fear of God sets us free from fearing people. I think I'm going to do one more, and then we'll do instructions and break for lunch. That Jesus' style facilitates maturity. And again, we've been talking about this, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. But let's define maturity. Maturity is the growth process that moves us from being childishly needy, demanding, and manipulative to being able to care for ourselves and to selflessly care for others around us. Maturity moves us from primarily being takers to being persistent givers. It moves us from being unreliable, unstable people to being trustworthy and faithful men and women. As Jesus would say, and Paul recorded for us, it's more blessed to give than to receive. And the mature person grows into that. And Jesus-style mentoring facilitates maturity. It's why I love things like, I threw up this picture of Peter's house. And I just think about Peter and Rhett living with these guys and creating intentionally an environment over the course of a year that facilitates maturity in those young men. Because I see it happen in us. We go live with roommates, and half the time we just I'm annoyed, so I'm going to go in my room and shut my door and take care of me and sort of let everything else go to hell in a handbasket. That's the immature response. It's just reflective of us versus pressing in to say, what does it look like to help these men or women that I'm living with grow up in the Lord? Some of us choose not to even live with other people because of our own immaturity. I don't want to have to deal with any of that. I want to be comfortable. I want everything sort of, cultivated around me. Maybe I want to live at home where someone else pays for me and takes care of me and makes my food and does my... But again, maturity is the process, the growth process that moves us from being childishly needing, demanding, into being able to selflessly care for those around us. And we have this cultural aversion to maturity. I see it so much in entertainment. I see it so much in entertainment. I see it in the music that just sort of glorifies being in high school or being young, all of these songs about this stuff, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know very many older people who actually want to go back to being 17 or go back to high school. But we just sort of like sing about it like it's the best thing that ever happened. I remember as a little boy thinking like 17 is the pinnacle. I don't know why. Like I was like, when you're 17, like you've peaked. And then I got to 17, I'm like, I hope this isn't the pinnacle, like being 17 is hard. So we kind of glorify high school. We do it in what kind of shows we want to watch. We just all watch lots of really younger people having younger people drama, and that is entertainment. We just glorify immaturity. And we have an aversion to maturity. Again, all of this stuff we were talking about, that real love has duties and obligations and things like that, it just shows us that we're resistant to the idea of growing up. But growing up is what it takes to become like Jesus. So here's the question, and I want you to write a response to this, an honest response. Do you see maturity as a virtue and goal to pursue with all your heart? Do you see maturity as a virtue and goal to pursue with all your heart? So I'm going to give you just a couple minutes to write a response to that, a prayer to God, whatever you want to do, and then we'll have some announcements and instructions. Yeah? Yes. Do you see maturity as a virtue and goal to pursue with all of your heart?